Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. We have Stephen Clark from Heaven Grown Hemp, operates down in Mexico, talking about hemp opportunities in building hempcrete buildings. We have a series of year-end stories here on our hemp news segment and some more surprises. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight is from the southern United States. Government officials from two traditionally conservative states are defending voter-approved marijuana reform initiatives against legal challenges. Secretaries of State, along with the Attorney Generals from both Mississippi and South Dakota, recently filed responses to lawsuits seeking to invalidate their states' measures legalizing cannabis for medical purposes and recreational purposes, respectively. In Mississippi, prior to Election Day, the mayor of the city of Madison, Mississippi, asked the state Supreme Court to nullify the cannabis reform measures because she argued it was unlawfully placed before voters. The suit did not weigh in on the merits of the proposal itself, but while the plaintiff argued that the legalization proposal was invalid because of a state statute that dictates the percentage of signatures required per district to qualify a ballot initiative. The Attorney General's office submitted a filing just on Monday of this week for the Secretary of State of Mississippi, Michael Watson, to contest the basis of that suit. Meanwhile, in South Dakota, another legal challenge against the constitutionality of a legalization initiative is playing out. In this case, plaintiffs are claiming that the recreational marijuana measure violates a state statute requiring proposals that appear on the ballot on a deal with a single subject. According to Pennington County Sheriff Kevin Tom and State Highway Patrol Superintendent Colonel Rick Miller, they filed suit last month, but the Secretary of State and pro-reform campaign South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws are pushing back and submitted detailed responses last week. South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws, which ran the campaign to pass the legalization measure, said in a separate filing that because Tom and Miller are state officials, statutes preclude them from filing state lawsuits against other members of the state in the first place. While voters in the state also approved a separate medical cannabis initiative on Election Day, that measure is not being challenged in the law enforcement driving lawsuit, which is being paid for in part with state funds. Nationally, with the NBA, a temporary NBA policy not to randomly drug test players for marijuana may well become permanent, the league's commissioner said this week. According to Commissioner Adam Silver, he said, quote, "We decided that given all the things that were happening in society, given all the pressures and stress that players were under, that we didn't need to act as big brother right now. I think society's views around marijuana have changed to a certain extent. Rather than mandate blanket tests," he said, the league would be reaching out to players who show signs of problematic dependency, not those who are using marijuana casually. He says, quote, "I'd say the same thing about alcohol or any other substance," end quote, Commissioner Silver said. The NBA initially announced a temporary suspension of cannabis drug testing earlier this year as players finished out their season in the so-called Bubble Arena in Orlando. That was later extended to the entire 2021 season following an agreement between the league and the Players Union. Michelle Roberts, the head of the National Basketball Players Association, who also joined the board of the major cannabis company Cresco Labs this year, predicted in a recent interview that a formal change to codify the policy indefinitely could come as early as next season. Out of Hamilton, Canada, patients with neck and head cancers who possess a history of cannabis use are not at an increased risk of developing a secondary cancer diagnosis. according to data published in the journal Cannabis. A team of researchers affiliated with McMaster University, the University of Toronto, and the University of British Columbia assessed the association between cannabis smoking and the risk of developing a second primary squamous cell carcinoma in patients previously diagnosed with head and neck cancer. The investigators reported that those who consumed cannabis, quote, showed lower odds of developing SPC cancers compared to non-users. The study concluded, quote, these results suggest that cannabis behaves differently than tobacco smoking. Our results are consistent with the theory that cannabis is not carcinogenic and hence would not follow patterns of field cancerization, end quote. The study's findings are consistent with many others concluding that cannabis smoke and tobacco smoke are not equally carcinogenic and that marijuana smoke exposure is not associated with many types of tobacco-related diseases such as lung cancer and COPD. This study, the rate of second primary head and neck cancer with cannabis use, appears in this month's edition of Cannabis. Out of Washington, D.C., in 2020, researchers worldwide published a record 3,500 scientific papers on the subject of cannabis, according to data compiled by the National Library of Medicine and PubMed.gov. Despite claims by some that marijuana has not yet been subjected to adequate scientific scrutiny, scientific interest in cannabis has increased exponentially in recent years. Since 2010, scientists have published over 23,000 peer-reviewed papers specific to cannabis, with the annual number of total papers increasing every year. By comparison, researchers published fewer than 3,000 total papers on cannabis in the years between 1990 and 1999, and fewer than 2,000 total studies during the 1980s. A 2018 paper assessing trends in cannabis-related publications concluded that much of this uptick in scientific interest is a result of researchers' newfound focus on marijuana's therapeutic activities. Investigators reported that the total number of peer-reviewed publications dedicated to medical cannabis has increased ninefold since the year 2000. In all, PubMed.gov now cites over 35,000 scientific papers on marijuana. Available to the public online since 1996, PubMed.gov is a free resource supporting the research and retrieval of biomedical and life sciences literature. Our next story is also out of Washington, D.C. Language included in the appropriation package approved by Congress earlier this week includes provisions repealing the long-standing federal ban on providing student aid eligibility to those with certain drug convictions. Provisions in the nearly 6,000-page package amend a 1998 federal law that mandated those applying for student aid to disclose if they'd ever had a drug-related conviction and barred hundreds and thousands of applicants from receiving funding. The new law strikes the subsection of the Higher Education Act that established the drug-related eligibility standard. The new law also restores the eligibility of those incarcerated to apply for student aid or Pell Grants. Those in prison have been ineligible to receive Pell Grants since the passage of an expansive 1994 crime bill, and this also allows them to receive higher education. On a national level, the Federal Trade Commission and Food and Drug Administration have launched Operation CBD Seat, sending fines and warning letters to CBD companies who allegedly made false or misleading health claims about their products. The Federal Trade Commission and Food and Drug Administration are cracking down on CBD companies making false or misleading health claims, according to them, about the products in an action they're calling Operation CBD Seat. The FTC announced a crackdown on December 17th, saying the agency had reached a settlement with 6 companies selling CBD products. Under the terms of the agreements, the companies must stop making unsupported health claims about the products, and some will pay monetary judgments to the FTC. On December 22nd, the FDA had issued 5 warning letters to companies selling CBD products over the company's health claims regarding the cannabinoid. The largest fine, $85,000, issued by the FTC under the crackdown was to California-based Reef Industries, Cannaterra, and hemp, over claims at the company's websites and Twitter accounts that CBD had been scientifically proven to prevent, cure, mitigate, or treat diseases and serious health conditions. The FDA's letters to Be Delightful, G&L Wellness, and New Leaf Pharmaceuticals, Next Level Services Group, and This Stuff is Good for You, and Wellness Biosciences do not levy fines, but rather direct companies to address the violations outlined in their letter. We had the CEO of Be Delightful on the show back in October. Here in Oregon's Deschutes County has announced a lawsuit saying it should be paid a portion of the state's cannabis tax revenue despite having banned any new cannabis processing and cultivation facilities in Deschutes County in 2019. Deschutes County, Oregon, is suing the state over cannabis tax revenue it believes it should be paid despite an August 19th moratorium on new cannabis processing and cultivation facilities in the county. The lawsuit names the Oregon Department of Revenue, Administrative Services, and the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, or OLCC, which oversees the state's cannabis industry. Mark Pettinger, the OLCC spokesman, said that when county commissioners voted to approve the ban, which was upheld by county voters during November's general election, that essentially became the point in time which the county was no longer eligible to receive its portion of the 17% state sales tax collected at the point of sale. He specified that even though the county allowed existing procedures to continue operations and retail activity takes place in the county, the ban on operations prohibits the county from receiving industry-derived tax revenue. Deschutes is the only county in Oregon to opt into cannabis operations and then subsequently opt out of permitting operations. Richard Hoover, a spokesman for the Department of Revenue, explained that prior to the moratorium, the county was receiving about 4% of the revenue from the state's Cannabis Revenue Fund, which is shared with all the counties. Without the moratorium, Deschutes County would have received about $514,000 from December 19, 2019 to September this year. Adam Smith, assistant legal counsel with Deschutes County, says that the county believes that the state is interpreting the law too narrowly. The court filing argues that the law does not preclude the county from the funds because the moratorium and subsequent opt-out by the voters did not impact current operations in the county. Smith said, quote, "This statute was not drafted from the perspective of what happened in Deschutes County. We have marijuana businesses and we have those impacts, but we aren't getting the money. Taxes are still being paid in the marijuana businesses in Deschutes County, and it's not clear where it's going," end quote. According to the Oregon Department of Revenue, Oregon received $133,150,000 in cannabis-derived sales tax revenue in the fiscal year 2020, which ended in June, an increase of more than $30 million from 2019 and more than $50 million from 2018. In the third quarter of 2020, the state dispersed $8,216,000 to counties that opted into cannabis operations, according to the Department of Revenue. In Washington State, Praxis Labs in Washington State has had its license suspended amid allegations that the cannabis testing lab was inflating THC results. The lab has decried the allegations as false, calling them liable in a case of agency overreach. The Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board, or LCB, has issued a summary suspension for a state licensed cannabis testing laboratory. According to the LCB, Praxis Lab falsified over 1,200 results in order to inflate THC levels. Additionally, the LCB alleges the lab attempted to destroy evidence during its investigation. The summary suspension is for 180 days, during which time the Washington LCB will seek the permanent revocation of Praxis marijuana laboratory certification and investigate acts of obstruction. Praxis Lab denies the charges and, in an emailed counterstatement, said, quote, "This is a clear-cut case of agency overreach and libel, and will be pursuing legal action immediately and have already started the appeal process in the interim," end quote. The governor of Wisconsin is thinking about adding marijuana legalization to his 2021 budget proposal as a means to boost tax revenue amid the coronavirus pandemic. Speaking to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in a recent interview, Wisconsin's Governor Tony Evers said that adult use legalization was on the table despite facing opposition from the legislature over more modest cannabis proposals in the past. While Evers attempted to get marijuana possession decriminalized and medical cannabis legalized through the budget in 2019, Republican leaders in Wisconsin's legislature nixed those measures from the final spending bill. There's since been an open question about how the governor would navigate the issue this time around, but now he's indicating he may go bolder. Evers criticized the legislature for failing to act on the more incremental reforms at the beginning of the year, citing overwhelming public support for medical cannabis legalization. Wisconsin Governor Evers said during his annual State of the Union address, quote, "When more than 80% of our state supports medical marijuana and elected officials can ignore those numbers without consequence, folks, something's wrong," end quote. We agree, Governor Evers. Wisconsin's legislators filed a bill last year to remove criminal penalties for possession of up to 28 grams of marijuana, but it didn't advance into committee hearing. Meanwhile, voters at a local level in Wisconsin have been making their opinion clear on cannabis reform over the past few years. They are not allowed to have a statewide initiative, but in 3 jurisdictions, counties and cities, they approved non-binding advisory questions in favor of marijuana legalization last year. That's after Wisconsinites across the state overwhelmingly embraced cannabis reform by supporting similar measures during the 2018 midterm elections. In another sign of the times, city officials in Wisconsin's capital, Madison, voted last month to remove most local penalties for marijuana possession and consumption, effectively allowing cannabis use by all adults 18 and older. Evers isn't the only governor with marijuana on the mind as the country heads into 2021. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo has tried for the past 2 years now to pass legalization through the budget. He has plans to include it in his request again in 2021. Like Evers, he stressed the economic potential of the reform amid the health crisis. Earlier this month, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam unveiled a budget proposal that lays the groundwork to legalize marijuana by including millions of dollars to support efforts to expunge cannabis convictions, as well as steps to set up the state to eventually implement a system of commercial sales. At the start of the year, the governor of Rhode Island called for marijuana legalization through a state-run program in her budget proposal. Governor Gina Raimondo included a legalization request in her 2019 Rhode Island budget submission to the legislature as well, but it was not adopted by the lawmakers. She said she'll try again in 2021. On our last story tonight, we're going to just go over some of our wins in 2020. 2020 has been a problem year for all of us, but for marijuana reform, we have made some incredible moves forward. You know, back when I first started working on marijuana law reform, when I was a teenager in the 70s and a young adult in the 80s, I just dreamed someday that these kind of things might happen. But here are some of the most profound changes in cannabis policy that happened in 2020. Number one, voters approved every statewide legalization measure before them on election day. Voters legalized the possession of marijuana by adults in Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and in South Dakota. They additionally approved ballot measures legalizing medical cannabis access in 2 states, Mississippi and South Dakota. South Dakota became the only state to legalize recreational and medical marijuana at the same time. On a second note, members of the United States House of Representatives voted in early December to approve the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement, or MORE Act, H.R. 3884, which removes marijuana from the Federal Controlled Substances Act, thereby eliminating the existing conflict between state and federal marijuana law and providing states with authority to establish their own cannabis laws free from the undue federal interference this causes. The vote marked the first time in 50 years that a chamber of the United States Congress has revisited the classification of cannabis as a federally controlled and prohibited substance. However, this only passed 1 House of Congress, is not heard in the Senate, and if Mitch McConnell is reelected next week, probably won't be heard in the Senate for a couple more years. But if they lose those votes in Georgia, is what I mean, and Mitch McConnell retains control of the United States Senate. But on a brighter note, also very important in 2020, tens of thousands of citizens previously burdened with the stigma of a lifelong marijuana conviction had those convictions expunged in 2020. In California alone, over 100,000 citizens had their records expunged. In several other states, including Colorado, Nevada, Illinois, and Washington, public officials granted pardons to tens of thousands of citizens with cannabis convictions. In addition, lawmakers in various states like Michigan and Vermont enacted legislation in 2020 explicitly facilitating the expungement of low-level marijuana records, joining over a dozen other states that have passed similar legislation. According to a 2020 polling, 70% of Americans now favor expunging the criminal records of those with marijuana-related convictions. And how they always warned us that we can't legalize marijuana because it would send the wrong signal to kids. Well, according to the national surveys done by the federal government, self-reported marijuana use by young people has either stayed stable or fallen during the time period that numerous states have adopted adult use cannabis legalization. That's according to the findings compiled by the federally sponsored Monitoring the Future study and others. Data compiled by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention similarly reported that the number of adolescents admitted to drug treatment programs for marijuana-related issues has fallen precipitously in states that have legalized and regulated its adult use. So we must carry on in 2021. I'm recording this just before the end of the year. So while you're watching it now, 2020 is hindsight. So I want to remind you, if you or a loved one have a family member or friend who needs a medical marijuana permit, we can help them find a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the United States. You call our office for a recommendation. Our phone number is 503-235-4606. Again, give us a call at 503-235-4606. The rest of the show, we're going to have an interview with Stephen Clark from Mexico and his company Heaven Grown Hemp. And I hope you enjoy that. We'll be back next week, and help us restore hemp. Good night. Well, I would like to introduce Stephen Clark, or Esteban Clark. Which one do you prefer to go by?
Steven's good. Steven's good.
That's mainly in English, though. I know some people here to go by Esteban as well.
Sometimes we can go by both, Steven, Esteban.
Okay. Well, you are a longtime cannabis activist. I think we first met down was it in Uruguay?
Correct.
Yeah, it was at the Expo Cannabis about 5 or 6 years ago. And
Correct.
doing presentations about hempcrete and hemp buildings. And now you've got the company called Heaven Grown. You want to tell our audience how you came to be involved with hemp?
Well, I guess mainly by people like yourself, Jack Hare, all the great legends that have found all this information and done all this great work, and you just laid the groundwork just perfect for us. So thank you very much for all of that. And it's really how we came across to all this, because if it wasn't for all that information that we were able to read and access, and all the benefits of hemp and how you can make clothes and how you can make construction and plastics, that's really where it changed our life. So I remember 2010, we went to Spain, and I went to a conference by Steve Allen, the International Hemp Building Association. And I was just impressed by hearing all these people talk about all these benefits about hemp. I remember there was a presentation by a scientist from the University of Bath who was making a material similar to Kevlar, just with hemp fiber and chocolate, what they call polyphenolic resins, which was just completely amazing. So I think that just got us very excited into all the benefits that you can do with, or all the great things that you can do with hemp. And that's why we founded the company. We believe that every human being should have a house, should have food, should have water, should have energy, should have medicine, and should have clothing. And all those things hemp can provide. Hemp can provide in less than 90 days, or in 100 days. So we're trying to push that a lot, especially for countries like Mexico, that unfortunately we have a large population, but half of that population still lives in poverty or below the poverty line, which means that they don't have access to running water or to good housing.
I think that's something that I had not explained to our audience till now, that you are in Mexico and a citizen.
Oh, yeah.
It's so good. It's hard to know that, though. But
yeah, well, we're in Mexico, and I guess Latin America, hence how we met in Uruguay. And ideally, well, we believe that the plant is for everybody. And once again, repeating ourselves, thanks to everything that you've shown us, and Jack Hare and all the great cannabis activists throughout many years that held it strong and throughout the prohibition. Now, I guess, now it's to a certain extent legal. So now we can take on all that information and make great applications. So for example, now we're exploring a lot bioplastics and graphene derived from hemp, with the ideal that we can do batteries, compostable batteries to replace lithium. So really we see that hemp just is the future. It will give us everything that humans need now and in many years to come. Not only the basic things like the housing, the shelter, the medicine, but we can also have very high-tech applications like compostable batteries that can run planes, cars, boats. Basically, every machine could be made out of hemp and powered out of graphene batteries, which are made out of hemp. So we're trying to push a lot that future.
I know I have visited several buildings in Mexico that you were involved in constructing out of hempcrete and polished coconut fiber, I believe, and lime. How many different building projects have you been involved with there?
Here in Mexico, around 20 projects. We've built the one in Tepoztlán you came to see that with the bamboo frame and the hemp, which is actually the world's first hempcrete and bamboo building, both techniques integrated. And we've done prototypes down by the by Cancun, the Mayan Riviera, to because a lot of the information of hempcrete is based on the I guess the colder parts or the colder regions, Europe, higher latitudes. There's not a lot of information based on the tropics or in Mexico. So we did a lot of experiments to see how hempcrete was going to withstand to the earthquakes, to the hurricanes, to the tropical heat, to the humidity. And we found that it's fantastic. Like I tell you, we have approximately around 20 buildings all over Mexico, and we built what technically would be the tallest hempcrete building in the continent. We reached 20 meters of height, which is approximately 60 feet. So it's a four-story building with 60 feet of height, all with wood structure, hempcrete walls. And on that building was very interesting because on the last floor, we ran out of hemp, so we had to get more material. So we actually told the owner we have to, unfortunately, back then it was, well, it's still kind of illegal, the whole hemp thing. We have to, we now have permits, which are, well, we'll get into that in a bit, but we had to import back then or use coconut fiber. We used coconut fiber, and the owner was so happy that he went on to develop two more buildings made out of coconut fiber. So we found that we could not only do hempcrete, but we can do cococrete. And now what we found, which is a fantastic mix, is a 50-50 between coconut and hemp. And then we mix those two together. We use the long fibers of the coconut and the short fibers of the hemp. Then we mix that with the lime. And now we're making a very, very strong material, which I don't know, I guess you have to call it cocoa hempcrete or something, but it's been very interesting to be working with this noble material.
I see. So when you're talking about the short fibers of hemp, it's the hurd fibers, not the bast fibers. Or do you chop up the bast fibers and use those too?
If when we have access to the whole plant, we chop it all up and we use the long fiber, well, basically the bast fiber and the hurd. The bast fiber gives us a lot of tension inside the hempcrete structure. And this we found by testing hempcrete versus cococrete. They're both fantastic material. Hemp and coconut have a very similar chemical composition. So in terms of where we're talking about lignin and hemicellulose and cellulose, all these constituents that actually make up the stalks, hemp and coconut are very, very similar in both of their natures. So that's why we decided to go for coconut as a good substitute. When we did the compression tests, we found that hempcrete was breaking before the cococrete. When we took them to height test to see how they would break, and we dropped them from at least 30 feet of height, the hempcrete completely shatters, and the cococrete just kind of it dents. So we found that it's a very interesting characteristic. So the long fibers of the coconut actually hold it together. And unfortunately, all the hemp that we have as it's imported, it already comes selected. It comes from Holland. We have to import it, unfortunately, and we don't have the long fibers. So that it works, but we found that with the long fiber, you have just a very, very sturdy material, which also works even better when it comes to earthquakes.
Which are pretty common in Mexico City and other
Just
places.
a little bit.
We live here in Oregon. We don't get that many, though I'm told a really big one is going to come really soon. So
they say up there in the Northwest that you'll have a big movement. But that's the whole point of building with hemp, because if we know that the earth is going to shake, it's a good substitute for materials. It's fireproof. So, for example, all the problems that people have in California or all the West Coast in the US that unfortunately now the fires every summer are bigger and bigger. We could think of even firewalls out of hempcrete, houses out of hempcrete. It would still be unfortunate with the whole fire situation, but you wouldn't lose your house people wouldn't have to evacuate. We could stop fires at many points. So it's a very interesting material to be using because it's hypoallergenic. So for interiors, you have non-toxic interiors, you have very comfortable interiors. You even have negative ions on the interiors, which are very healthy for you. And
I was there. I noticed some of your walls were polished and almost glass-like. Was that with the lime, or how did you achieve that glass-like
the
finish on your?
finish,
Yeah.
we do a lot of formulas, which are actually, there's a book called The 10 Books of Architecture by Vitruvius. Vitruvius was the architect of Julius Caesar. And he actually wrote a book which is almost 2,000 years old. And in that book, he talks about different mixtures. They used to call their buildings opus, or basically operas. So it was like a whole sonata for them to build. And in these building techniques, they have for their finishes, they have a finish called marmorino, which is a polished finish. We found that in North Africa, they call it tadelact. In Japan, they call it asaini. In Mexico, they call it chukum. So it's actually, we found that there's humans throughout many, many years have been using different grades of limestone, very fine limestone and very fine marble dust, and you mix them together. And the movement is called burnishing. Well, you use the trowel, that metal trowel, and as you keep on passing and passing and passing, you basically are kind of polishing the wall, and it gives you these really nice finishes. Some people polish for days and days and days, and it literally looks like a marble wall. So it's a very nice way to do a finish, but a cheaper way, I guess.
Yeah. So you have a company, Heaven Grown. You want to tell our audience about how Heaven Grown started and what it does?
Well, yeah, we have we're called Heaven Grown. We've been active as a company now for 10 years. And really, our background comes from engineering. We used to do a lot of renewable technologies, solar systems, in terms of photovoltaic and thermal. And we came to a contest which is called Solar Decathlon, in which you're supposed to build or you're supposed to power a house completely by solar. So you have to do the whole design on what materials you're going to do the walls, the windows, etc. So when we did the whole analysis, unfortunately, all the materials that we have access to here in Mexico have huge energy losses. So we started investigating what's a material that doesn't have this energy loss. What's a material that helps, well, that's very good for the wall system, and that's how we came across hempcrete. And when we found out of all the benefits that you could do with hemp, that you can make a house, that you can have your clothing, that you can make food, which is a superfood, that you could filter water, you could do all these great things, we decided that we had to step away from just the renewable sector of things because it's not really a holistic approach. And we can now do regenerative architecture, we can do engineering, we can do clothing, you can do social programs, you can do health, you can encapsulate all those things into one with hemp. So that's when we decided to create Heaven Grown. And through Heaven Grown, we do a lot of research and development to make sure that everything they say that hemp really does, it can actually do. And not only can it do it, but can we translate it for countries like Mexico, where we don't have a lot of capital, where we need to have low tech ways of transforming the thing. So throughout the past 10 years, we found, or we've developed many ways on how to work with the material with a very cheap way, which is kind of accessible for Latin countries or countries which are in a similar aspect like Mexico. And so we're promoting programs like Grow Your Own House. You know, instead of spending 20 years paying a mortgage, spend 100 days growing hemp, and then spend the next year, if you want, doing 5 bricks a day. It's only going to take you maybe half an hour. And after a year, you'll have enough material to build yourself a 1,000 square foot home. I know maybe for other countries, I guess they have the houses, and like they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So unfortunately, we have a lot of necessity. So we're finding new ways on how to use the material, that it's accessible, that it's cheap, and that'll give you all the benefits of good living. You know, because at the end, we're all the same as humans, so we require the same basic things. You know, a good house, good food, good energy, medicine, water, clothing, etc. So yeah, that's basically what Heaven Grown is, and that's what we keep on trying to do.
I know that you and I have been
presenters at various conferences in Uruguay and Colombia and in Mexico. And you are usually making presentations about hempcrete construction and kind of showing people how it's done and some buildings that you've worked on and things. So if someone wants to reach out and contact you at Heaven Grown, what is the best way? What is the website and the email to contact you at?
They can find us at heavengrown.com. That's our website. The same on Facebook. If you put Heaven Grown Hempcrete Mexico, will appear, or on Instagram as well, Heaven Grown. You can find our more visuals of what we do. And if you want to contact us, you can contact us directly at info@heavengrown.com. We share a lot of information. We do a lot of open source work, especially when it comes to the construction, because we really believe that these kind of things everybody should know about. Everybody should know that it's very easy to grow your house, and it's very easy to grow your food. And whatever doubts people have, we can help mitigate that and help them have access to seeds, to basically anything that they need in the hemp space. We can help them towards it.
Sounds like you have a big dog there.
Yes. You got a big bark.
Not a big bark, but that's okay. So tell me more about the bioplastic work you're doing and what you're working with in that regard.
Well, just like as a little parenthesis, we basically are now able to grow our own hemp in Mexico through our human right, because the Supreme Court of Mexico ruled that cannabis is our human right in Mexico. So we have what they call the freedom of the development of our personality. So if the development of our personality is with cannabis, then it's our human right, which basically allows us to grow as much as we want, transport, consume, process, etc. The only thing that you cannot do is you cannot commercialize THC. But apart from that, you can do anything you want with the plant. So what we're showing people, or we're trying to not more than show, transmit, is that if it's our human right, if it's my human right, it's everybody's human right. We don't need to have a special paperwork for this. So this is what we need to fight, that we already have that groundwork. The government has already acknowledged that it's our right. So on that note, we've started growing and we've started processing. And one of the main things, apart from construction, one of the main problems that, especially now that we're having with this whole COVID situation, are single-use plastics. Single-use plastics have come onto the market again like there's no tomorrow. And there's also the whole...
in our water and killing
and everything. Exactly.
Toxic environment that petrochemicals are processed into plastics.
Exactly.
And the only place where that refinement is going on, they poison the environment, and there's an increase in cancers where petroleum is processed into plastics. So that poison goes into our environment. Now they've even found it in the embryos and
the microfibers. That's crazy in the embryos.
Yeah. So the thing about cannabis oil, plastic made from hemp oil, is that it isn't toxic at all, and it's biodegradable. And so it has this huge, and even given the limited supply of hemp seed oil and its high cost compared to other vegetable oils, hemp plastic is cost competitive with petroleum plastic today. So when
every day, any day,
on a larger scale and grow hemp seeds for the oil and protein without regard to the THC content, we shouldn't be measuring THC content in a plant that's grown for seed oil and protein, nor in a plant that's grown for fiber. We should pick out the plants that produce the most seed oil and protein and the most fiber without regard to THC content. That really shouldn't matter when you're growing oil and protein and fiber. So the THC could be a byproduct as well, as could CBD and other.
Correct. And now we're actually making the bioplastics not only from the oil, but from the herd as well, as a filler. So there's different ways now of processing, getting the lignin out of the herd, getting the hemicellulose, the alpha cellulose. There's a company out of Colorado called Pure Hemp Technology that has a fantastic reactor to do these kind of separations. And also the beauty about it is that there's a way of doing hemp plastics, or basically what we call lignocellulosic fibers, which is coconut, bamboo, hemp, and you can mix them with old milk and cure them with tea, and you'll make a bioplastic. Now, these formulas, they're from 1850. We found a book that was like 1898, which was based on casein. And casein plastics used to be the norm, but it's basically the
Light and had some other
exactly,
names before
exactly,
we started
exactly,
petrochemical byproducts.
exactly. And that what you're saying is really key, because anything that hemp can do, or anything that that petrochemicals can do, hemp can do, and without all that toxicity that's involved, and without all that exclusivity, because it means that we can give it back to the people. People can once go back into their backyards and grow their house and grow their bioplastics, and they can grow what they need. And if they want to do an industry or develop and go further on, they can grow for that industry, but at least people can have their basics. And then you
Instead
can
of
couple that.
having, instead of having the money from all of this go into the hands of the
Exactly.
petrochemical industry, it can go in the hands of our farmers and our community and enrich the people. Reasons that
Exactly.
was for its economic centralization capacity. That you and I can't go drill an oil well, and we
No,
certainly can't build a refinery to process
exactly.
stuff into products. So we don't. But any farmer can grow hemp seed and get a hemp seed press and press it and pour it right into his diesel engine and drive his tractor or his truck or whatever. So
Exactly.
petrochemical companies don't want that. And that's why they instituted this whole marijuana myth. That's something that we've been pushing for decades. And but it's a good time to put it in. So I did.
I think right now it's the best time, because we're just right at that moment that all the other solutions haven't really met up to the challenge. We've talked about all these programs of carbon capture 2020, and then they go 2030, and now we've pushed to 2050. But they haven't really found anything that can create a carbon sink to start cooling the planet down, because we have to grow a lot of trees.
The solar panels, they have to monitor toxic chemicals and get lithium and all these destroy the environment in so many different ways. We need to come up with technology that does not destroy what little bit of the wilderness and the environment and the oxygen and soil we have left for future
Correct.
generations.
Correct. And that's where hemp plays a fantastic part, because not only is it a huge carbon sink as it's growing, but then when we lock it up with lime and make hempcrete, we actually have carbon negative houses if it's local, which means that basically for every house that we build, we're actually absorbing more CO2 that goes out into the atmosphere. So it actually starts making sense, because we have a very big housing problem in the world. Now we can solve that whilst we're actually capturing carbon out of the atmosphere. So basically we're doing a two-in-one. And that's the whole point of entering this new regenerative architecture, regenerative farming, because doing the whole net zero thing is not good enough. We need to actually start healing the planet, and to heal it, we need to put more back in than what we're taking out. And it is possible. We just need to coupling different technologies. And that's where, for example, graphene is going to be a game changer. Graphene is one of the materials that will change the world. It's basically a carbon allotrope. It's a hexagonal shape of carbon. It's a 2D material, but it has a strength when you're talking about a monoatomic layer. So a single layer of it is 200 times stronger than any steel that we know of. If imagine that in 3D, graphene is basically the structure of a diamond. So if we cut a diamond in little tiny monatomic layers, we get graphene. Now, graphene is a great superconductor. It conducts heat, it conducts energy. It can actually absorb CO2, it can filter water. So for all this future that we're talking about, it's going to be electric. All the batteries, instead of being out of this toxic lithium or toxic cobalt, it will be out of graphene made out of hemp. Batteries that will last 20 years, and when they finish, we can compost them back into the ground just like biochar. They're going to amend our soils, and they're going to keep unlocking the carbon back into the atmosphere. Graphene and solar panels will revolutionize the way that the energy is harvested, because we're only talking about 25% efficiency in terms of solar panels, which is very, very good for nowadays. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we were talking about 8 to 10%, So at least we're getting there, but we need to really start ramping up the way we're attending these problems. And that's why we really believe in open source, because hemp really is like, this is not the problem. Cannabis is not the problem. Cannabis is the solution that we require for today's inclemency. So if we can actually get all this information into the hands of the younger generations, that they can take on hemp, not in the eyes of prohibition, but in the eyes of the tools that will help them reshape the future of this planet, I really think that we can get out of this very quick, in less than 15 years. But we need to get it out there. People need to know that it is possible, that we can make houses in 100 days, that we can, in 1 hectare, which is like 2.5 hectares, or call it an acre. In an acre, you can make a 750 square foot home, or enough material for a 750 square foot home in 90 days. So for the problem of homelessness in the States and basically in the whole world, if Mexico grew, just as a data number, if we grew hemp as a crop rotation in our agricultural soil, we'd have enough material to make 60 million houses. Basically, we do that twice, and all of Mexico has a house, It's like 2 people per house. That's how quick you can solve a housing situation in a country. And we're talking about being the 10th largest country in the world. So if we scale it up to, if the US would participate into this growing, if we grow out all in Latin America, we could have everybody housed in the next 10 years, carbon capture, batteries which are compostable. We could really have a better future. So that's why I really thank people like yourself, who you had the vision 30 years ago before anybody even saw none of this, and you had it strong, and you went to China and you developed the first paper company, and you did all those struggles even before people understood it, because even now people don't understand it. But you kept it strong. You've done so much work and so much battle to keep all this information alive. So I hope people actually acknowledge all this, because some people think that it's just very easy, but really it's like Newton said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So yeah, thank you very much.
There were giants that I worked with as well. So I first read about hemp in a book by Ernest Abel called Marijuana, the First 12,000 Years. And then when I met Jack, and in the early, I think in 1982 is when I met him. And I first read his book in 81. It was a long time ago, but things keep developing. And fortunately, I was saying earlier in this show, in wrapping up the news for the year, that compared to when we started this show more than 24 years ago, back then the news was just a whole bunch of marijuana arrests and, all these, how many people did they arrest statistics. Very rarely did we have a good hemp and cannabis story. Now we're overwhelmed with them. We have the breakthrough at the World Health Organization. Now it's no longer against international law to have marijuana. And then here in the United States, we had 6 different states vote on legalizing marijuana, and we won every single one of them. And in the state of South Dakota, they went from complete prohibition to passing both medical and recreational marijuana. While at the same time, we have less kids that are using marijuana and less kids going into treatment for marijuana. All these years they've been telling us we're going to send the wrong message to kids and all the kids are going to end up in hell or something. So, to see all these things, the whole change is pretty fantastic. And many of our friends like Jack Hare or Dr. Todd Vicaria or Richard Davis, for others, they didn't live to see this, but they certainly, those are some of the shoulders we've stood upon.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing these times. And now even they've gone to decriminalize even medicinal mushrooms in Oregon. So we're starting to see different mindsets appearing. And it's very weird because the US is still federally, it's illegal. but um, it's pretty much the most legal place that I've ever seen. It's very
Yeah,
interesting.
it is. It is. It's the state level, and we've led the way with these state initiatives, even though people said we couldn't do it. So,
Exactly,
many people said it'll never happen in our lifetime, So things keep
exactly.
getting.
And people like Joe Walsh with all the signatures, that just
Yeah. John Walsh, God bless his soul, he gathered more signatures than anyone else, and
exactly.
worked good to work with him. But now, what are your plans now, Stephen? You're at the start of a new grow season. What are the future plans with Heaven Grown? And are you working with the Hemp Building Association as well? Uh, let's talk about the
Um,
future for you.
well, now that we have our permits, now we're starting to grow our first fields here in Mexico. So hopefully by May, we'll be harvesting our own material to be able to use for our own construction. So really, our plans now for this year is we're hitting very strong the graphene. We want to launch a prototype by mid-June of a battery developed with our own hemp fibers and everything. And really, the construction, we're moving more to give it away as a social aspect of the business. It I guess it does make money, but it's not really like the greatest business of all. But we really see that it changes people's lives. So we would really like to kind of give it away as a just for humanity, so that they can use it the best way to improve it. We're setting up an open source platform where we're showing people how to do mixes, how to make a small wall, how to do your floor, how to do your roof system, so that hopefully we'll get more people involved into growing. So really our mission this year is to transmit as much information in terms of the construction, to get the battery out there, and to let people know that it's our human right. And these things we shouldn't take so lightly. We have to fight for them. And if it's already been granted to us, cannabis is our human right. We should fight it to the last because our human right doesn't stop in Mexico. So if it's already been acknowledged as a human right in a country, it has to be acknowledged as a human right in every country. So I really think that we should take that fight because they always limit us. They always legalize, but it's a weird analogy. We always say treat us like you treat alcohol. If I go to a liquor store and I want to buy all the liquor that there is, don't regulate me onto how much liquor I can buy. Why? Because I'm a free person. I'm an adult. With cannabis, they always treat us that they always criminalize the user. So they're proposing legalization in many parts of Latin America, but they're proposing maximum limits that if you have more than 200 grams, then you go to jail. If you have less than that, you get a fine, and if you have less than 28, it's okay. So
So
we always fight for these things, yeah.
just as in the United States, we had one house of our bicameral or two house legislature pass marijuana legalization. In the United States, our House of Representatives passed it, but it's not going to get any hearing in the Senate, at least not until there's change there, maybe next week. But in Mexico, you've had your Senate approve marijuana legalization, but the Chamber of Deputies has not, and they're not going to
Has
hear.
not.
And so
Correct.
we're in the same situation in terms of, but the difference is in Mexico, the Supreme Court has ordered the legislature to legalize marijuana. Here in the United States, we don't have that. The Supreme Court won't touch it. But in your case, you have that advantage is that the Supreme Court is ordering the legislature to do it.
Correct. And the government's been in default for 2 years now. And Mexico legalized in 2017. We're just legalizing again because there hasn't been a framework in which to operate. So that's why the Supreme Court has, through what's called jurisprudence, when you have 5 court cases that get the same resolution, they basically ordered the Mexican government saying that their cannabis laws that they have on the people are unconstitutional, so that they have to redo them. And that's what we're fighting because right now the government is they got confused because they're legalizing in terms of commerce, but they're still criminalizing the user.
Yeah.
And all they had to do was just stop criminalizing the user, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree. Like we have these huge cash industries that want to come in here and monopolize this industry. against the interests of you and I, the users in the community. And so in Mexico, I know many activists were not happy with the law that passed the Mexican Senate. And there were a number of items in the American law that were put in at the last minute by Republicans that activists such as myself don't like. But we have to keep working at that. Neither one of those laws will pass, and that might be a good thing because we need to work for something better.
And that's a very good thing that we see that the law didn't pass, that even though they delayed it, but if they would have passed that law, oof, it would have been a difficult situation for a lot of Mexicans. But at least now there is still a framework of, there's still time for people to get what's called an amparo. The amparo is kind of like a plea. It's a very weird legal figure that we have in Mexico. Basically, whenever the government violates your rights, you can plea against that. So it just goes very bad in the sense that, just to start off, we have a government that's violating our rights. So, and we kind of acknowledge that. And as we've acknowledged that, we acknowledge that we have to have a legal system that you can go plea against it. So even though now that Mexico is already legal and we're entering supposedly full federal legalization, you can go now and ask for a permit with the equivalent of the FDA, and they're going to deny it. You go that with a judge of the circuit, so it's like a civil judge, call it that, and you win the plea. So they give you a paper that now you go back to the health authority, the FDA, and then they extend you this paperwork which says, all right, now you can have it. So what we're telling them is like, if you're going to give him anyways, why the whole, that you have to go with a lawyer and do this? They're just making it harder for people. And why do we have to have a paper which acknowledges our human rights,
Yeah, well, I agree. So again, I think we're about out of time here, Stephen. We've had Stephen Clark from Heaven Grown in Mexico at heavengrown.com. If you want to reach out and find out more about your work, and email is info@heavengrown.com. Is there anything else you want to say in closing, Stephen?
Just keep on reading. Hemp is really one of the greatest and most noble plants. I guess that's why it's accompanied humans for throughout of history. So let's just keep on sharing the information that it has, that it can make houses, that it can bring food, it can bring energy, it can really transform the world. And now it's our human right. So let's keep on fighting that through education and through good heart.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thanks for your work. And I look forward to seeing you somewhere down the road, whether it's Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, or maybe here in the United States.
For sure. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for the invitation, and hope everybody's good over there, and all the best and all the love.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Take care.
I've been saying all my life that hindsight is 2020, and as this show airs, now we can say 2020 is hindsight.
Right on. 2020 is hindsight.
Yeah. All right.
See, even the dog agrees.
Yeah, I'm glad he likes it. Better go take it for a walk.
Thank you very much, Paul. All the best. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye.